All right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is Jomo Stewart and crew here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation. It is Friday, February 17th. A little bit off schedule, but for a special meeting, very special, actually. So we are taking just a slight break from our discussions relative to air quality, but I do promise you that we will be resuming those immediately because it is a very pressing issue. Recently, the EPA informed the community that the major sections of its implementation plan for PM 2.5 abatement were going to be rejected. And so we need to wrap our arms around that, or probably put a better way, we need to take one of the arms from behind our back and really address that issue, because we have not we've not worked fully to address our air quality issue heretofore. But in any case, yes, so it is right around 9:05 in the a.m. and we have some very special guests this morning. So we do have representatives of Westinghouse who are here to discuss something that's a little off subject. Most of the discussions we've had relative to Westinghouse over the course of the last couple of years have been regarding micronuclear and cutting edge nuclear. However, this is a little bit different. But I won't steal anyone's thunder. Our guest, our main guest is Mr. Robert Bernard of Westinghouse. We also have with us Mr. Timothy Held, as well as Chris is here from GVA. So, hey, good morning, boss. Thank you for coming. And of course, Mr. Roger Burgraff, our favorite visitor. So without further ado, I will hand it over to our friends from Westinghouse. Let me share some screen. And as always, I would simply remind the group that, again, this is for you, these presentations. And so if you have questions, if you have comments, the chat box is being monitored, but you may also simply take yourself off of mute and fire away with your questions or comments. Again, this is for you. So please, this is our opportunity to do deep dives on things for which we normally have to just sit in the back of the room and hope that they answer our questions during their presentation. So without further ado, Mr. Bernard, please.
Thank you, everybody, very much for your time this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And please, we don't need to go through all this without questions. As you said, ask questions along the way. We can stop and dig in any detail we want to. So at any point, we use the chat or ask questions here in the room. You can go to the first slide on here. But we were just talking about it before the meeting this morning around challenges with the evolving electricity supply, the evolving grid. It's something that it's a challenge everywhere, but it looks different everywhere, right? So if you look at New York State, you look at California, you look at Germany, you look at other countries overseas, there's a lot of different problems, different looks at similar problems. And a lot of that has to do with renewable penetration in the market, renewable energy, and the continued increase in non-dispatchable generation. You also have electrification, you have electric vehicles, so you're increasing electricity demand in a lot of markets, and you have retirement of assets that are out of age, of coal assets, for example, that it's very difficult to renew and extend the life. It applies to nuclear power plants as well, right? So you have nuclear power plants that are being retired and difficult to get extensions. So you have a situation where we've got an imbalance in electricity supply. We've got changing patterns of electrical distribution on the existing distribution network. And you've got overall reduction in stability because we're adding renewable energy, which in a lot of cases in solar is essentially a solid state device. Batteries, lithium-ion batteries, which these don't add stability to the grid. They don't add that capacity to maintain voltage, maintain frequency. As we've been working with GVEA and others, Fairbanks is a great example where it's a unique set of challenges and some goals for decarbonization, for cleaner energy, but it's certainly, in our experience, a bit unique and it's an interesting challenge to solve. So there's a suite of solutions. Apologize for my voice. I lost it yesterday. My voice cracks, by the way. There's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that are going to address these. It's certainly not one size fits all. You're going to have lithium-ion batteries. You're going to have hydrogen turbines. A big part of the mix is, we believe, and most industry experts believe, is long duration energy storage, which is, it's bigger, stores more energy than your typical batteries, typically defined by energy storage that can discharge electricity for a duration of 10 hours or more. The other aspect of that is that's important is lithium-ion batteries are great. and they work really well for 1, 2, 4-hour durations. But those technologies have an inherent coupling of how fast you discharge the electricity, the power capacity out, and the energy capacity they can store. And since those two things are coupled, you need to buy double the batteries for double the duration, and you have to pay for both things. We're focused on technologies that decouple the power capacity that you need and the duration, so you can add more and more storage in a much more cost-efficient manner. And that's a big focus right now in general for energy storage. And you can go to the next.
Actually, Lee, right at the top, we have a question.
Oh, yes,
First of all, that was one of the most dense opening statements we've ever heard, which is great. So let's start with, do we have a question regarding what we're seeing here?
Yeah, so those are, you're correct. There's a duck curve. I took a little quack symbol off of the one that I thought was cute, but I removed it. It's just some examples of the different challenges when you look at electricity supply and demand, and how there's large gaps, but it looks a little bit different region by region, ISO by ISO, state by state. So it's just a few different looks at that to show you, as you mentioned, it's the duck curve and a couple of examples, and some looks in Europe as well.
Okay.
So I was mentioning long duration energy storage as our focal point. There's a little bit of information here in a market look, and you could go online and look at EIA's projections or various agencies in Europe, or you can look at, in this case, some data from a report that McKinsey put out around long duration energy storage and how rapidly the deployment is going to happen when you compare it against the planned renewable penetration.
It's going to have to happen.
It's going to have to happen, correct.
Yeah.
And you see here by 2035, you're looking at globally over 1,000 gigawatts of capacity potentially. Now, again, you can look at all these different looks, but they all kind of coalesce around a pretty common market point, which is on this order of magnitude. It's very, very large. The challenge you have today is outside of pumped hydropower, you really don't have anything that's been deployed at large scale commercially, right? You have some very early stage nascent technologies. You have some things that are more mature. You do have some niche applications like compressed air that have been deployed where you're storing compressed air in large caverns underground. But there's a big, big need to get these technologies commercialized. And the challenge is right now, in general, in the US in particular, and most markets really, the focus is on the immediate need, which is generally 2 to 4 hours of energy storage. It's rapidly changing, but right now, utilities are spending money on batteries and kind of waiting and hoping all this stuff gets off the ground, but time's getting shorter and shorter. So you see a lot of incentives right now in the US, overseas. Here you have the Inflation Reduction Act, which now gives significant tax credits on these type of storage facilities. And you have the Department of Energy through their new office, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, putting hundreds of millions of dollars of investment specifically to commercialize these technologies. So it's a great environment from that perspective. There's a lot happening very, very rapidly. I think everybody went from waiting to running. So there's a lot of things happening and a lot of government agencies trying to get everything lined up, but it's going to be a very exciting time. And we believe, we'll talk about our technology that Westinghouse and Echogen have developed. We don't believe there's one size fits all. We believe our solution fits all. It's very, very flexible, fits a lot of applications, but there's certainly going to be a handful of technologies that emerge that solve various niche problems, very, very, very long durations, shifting energy from summer to winter, right? Those are different applications that are going to be needed. And there's going to be new technologies that fill those gaps.
So taking a step back, I mean, really, we have always, as a species, had energy storage. You mentioned hydro, but one of the reason hydrocarbons became the staples of our energy market were the fact that they could sit there for a long time. They had a high energy content and they were fungible. You could easily move them around. Fort Wainwright, for example, my understanding is they can get a load of coal and they'll have a 3-month pile.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
It's there and readily available.
That's right.
As you said, for that immediate use and distribution.
Right.
Okay, but when we're dealing with intermittents like solar, like wind, it's again increasing the energy storability over time, both the amount and the duration.
And if you look at what's happening in some places now, I can't name the facilities, but there's some nuclear plants in the United States that during certain times of the day, there's a lot of renewable generation in that area, and they have essentially negative power pricing. They don't have a need. Now, nuclear reactor, you want to keep that thing running at 100%, the way that unit runs, etc. So what you're doing in that case is dumping hundreds of megawatts and turning it into heat and just dumping it into the air.
Right. Cooling pond.
Or cooling pod, or put it into one of the Great Lakes, right? So you're dumping hundreds of megawatts of electricity for 8 to 10 hours.
We like to keep the Chena River ice free.
A good way to talk the river, right? But you have in that case, you have clean nuclear energy available that's not being utilized because you don't have a way to effectively and cost effectively really store that much energy. The technology we'll talk about here, that was actually the seed of the idea in Westinghouse about 8, 9, almost 10 years ago. There was some interest in California with the nuclear plants there for exactly this reason. Because California has always been a bit ahead of the curve in terms of these problems of renewable energy.
Well, an adoption of the technology,
right?
But then have to work on the problems.
So we started to work on a thermal energy storage technology that could be easily coupled to a nuclear power plant. I could dump steam when I didn't need the electricity, store a whole ton of heat, and then re-inject it back in and generate electricity. Then the California plants announced they were closing. We were a little bit ahead of the market, but we continued to develop that technology. Along the way, through some work on advanced nuclear, we met Echogen, who's got a very compelling technology in supercritical carbon dioxide heat cycles. And you put all those pieces together and you end up with something it's not a completely new idea by any means by itself. And maybe we can go to the next slide. I'm sure it'll be a good time. But it's a novel way to achieve what some folks have been doing. I think what I'll do, we'll jump to the next one. I'll come back to this one. I'm going to go a little out of order.
So you just mentioned carbon dioxide. The stuff that I'd heard about regarding this kind of thermal energy storage were things like water, large mass of water, sand, even, what else? Mineral salts. So yeah, please.
Yeah. And there are ways to store where you take electricity, turn it into heat, store it, and then just turn it back into electricity. This is not that solution. That can work in certain applications. And if we wanted questions, Tim can answer any questions on those type of things here. But you're also limited by your efficiency and in a lot of cases, the cost effectiveness of it. What this is it's pumped thermal energy storage. So we mentioned pumped hydro, which pumped hydro is great. If we were able to go build it, if we could do the permitting and get the cost down, it would be great to do it, but it's very, very difficult, right?
And if you'd find that location close enough to
the right place, that's right.
And also has a hard time working someplace where you have persistent sub-freezing temperatures.
Right.
That's why.
Why you want to spoil the beauty of the thing with facts?
But each one of my specialties.
You can kind of think of this system analogous to pumped hydro. Instead of pumping water against gravity and letting it come down, we're pumping heat against a thermal gradient and letting that heat then generate electricity. So what you see here, you've got 3 main systems on this image. I've got the little building on the left is essentially a turbine building like you'd find at any power plant. Okay.
That would be this guy.
Yeah, that's right. There's a turbine, a generator, some big compressors in there, valves, just like you would find at a power plant. This whole thing looks and feels like a power plant. Then you've got a large water tank, as you said. You've got a large tank of water in essence. And then I have some other elongated tanks in this case those are filled with the mineral oil with engineered concrete modules that are submerged in that oil.
Oh, that's cool.
Okay, so the idea here is when you want to charge we can call it a battery for the sake of discussion. When you want to charge the battery, you're running a large electrically driven heat pump. And the refrigerant in that heat pump cycle is supercritical carbon dioxide, which has some interesting properties that allow this to all work at easy temperatures. I pump heat out of the water is right around the freezing point. So I'm essentially extracting the heat of fusion out of the water, freezing that water, and moving that heat through that heat transfer oil into the concrete in those buildings. The storing heat in concrete, bricks, rocks, not a new idea, but it's historically, when it's been attempted, you've got miles of heat transfer tubing, various things that make it expensive and maybe not terribly efficient. Well, Westinghouse patented some concepts around this. Is the concrete's directly submerged in the oil. So there's no tubing, there's nothing, there's channels that are in the engineered concrete modules. And so I'm effectively charging that concrete up to about 330 degrees Celsius. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see it charged up. I try to keep it simple, so only the 2 pictures, and we couldn't get you the video, it's too big. But now I've frozen the water, and I've got that concrete sitting there at 330 degrees C. And now to generate electricity, I'm taking that heat. Now I'm running it. What was a heat pump before? Now I got a heat engine running. Again, a CO2 heat engine, turbine, and a generator like you'd find at a regular power plant, generating electricity back onto the grid. It's as simple as it sounds. Actually, it's a pretty simple setup. There's some other folks out there who do something similar. One of the challenges is when you use certain refrigerants or use air, for example, that Malta uses, you end up needing extreme temperature differences. So you'll have molten salt on the hot side, but you'll have an antifreeze solution on the cold side, which is more expensive, more difficult to maintain, exotic alloys. The temperatures here, it's all carbon steels. There's no high pressure vessels. It's a bunch of tanks and pipes and a turbine building, in essence, that makes the facility operate. Right. So that's at its core, that's how it works. Before we go back, maybe we'll pause, see if there's any questions on that.
I would pause and offer opportunity for
And
questions.
if you want to add anything, Tim, please feel free.
No, you got it covered.
So is this entire this is just basically a tank that looks like a building?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now this is all closed loop, right? So the CO2, the water, the oil, it's all closed loop. You're not pulling cooling water from anywhere. It's all insulated, so you're not losing a lot of heat. You're going to lose some. It's about 0.5% a day, and you can insulate for various climates, etc. And the way you can counter that heat loss with a small heater that maintains your charge, which shows up as a house load on the electrical system, but it holds a charge. That's one of the reasons you use concrete. It holds heat very, very well. Some people ask, well, can you just do all oil? You can, but the oil is much more expensive than the concrete, and you have a big volume. That's why we use the concrete. The other reason is all the materials here, you can get them anywhere. It doesn't matter if I'm in Alaska, if I'm in France, if I'm in South Africa, I can make concrete. I can get water. I can make the oil on site with the constituent ingredients. And so most of the facility can be locally sourced wherever you are. A lot of the equipment here is off the shelf stuff, with the exception of the turbine and the compressor are a little bit unique because they're supercritical carbon dioxide. Do you have a question?
Oh, I do.
Sure.
I was wondering if you could, one is the oil proprietary?
No, it's a Dorotherm HF oil. I can send you the information on it.
Okay.
Yep.
And
It's
then,
non toxic. You can drink it if you
yeah,
wanted
sure.
to.
And
Oh, that
then,
would not be good.
could you talk?
You might be sick.
And the new campaign.
Take a gas for it.
Okay, could you talk a little bit more about supercritical CO2?
Sure.
Thank you.
So
And then we'll come to you, John.
when we describe carbon dioxide as supercritical, we're really referring to its thermodynamic state. So we're all used to, grade school, solid, liquid, vapor, those are the 3 states of matter. If you take a liquid and you increase its pressure above a certain level, which is called the critical pressure, it no longer has a distinct boundary between liquid and vapor. And if you take a cold supercritical fluid and you heat it up, unlike, let's say, water, where it goes to constant temperature and then boils, it just continuously increases in temperature and gets reduced in density. And so we operate our systems really over what are more appropriately called transcritical ranges. So all of these closed loop power cycles and heat pump cycles have what's called a high pressure side and a low pressure side. In our low pressure side, we're subcritical. So the CO2 acts like more of a traditional fluid. It's liquid and vapor. And in fact, we take advantage of that because during the liquid to vapor transition, it's doing that at constant temperature, just the same as the water is freezing at constant temperature. So it's a good match there. The high pressure side, then we're well above the critical pressure. So now when I add or subtract heat from the CO2, its temperature just uniformly increases or decreases. And that matches up very nicely with what the concrete and heat transfer fluid want to do. And so it's a question of matching the fluid to the reservoirs and vice versa. So that allowed us then to be selective about how we wanted to store our heat. And the criteria were it had to be low cost, and it had to be environmentally safe. And we wanted to keep it in a temperature range that allowed us to make the rest of the system out of materials that were, again, readily available and low cost. So that set of criteria is what drove us to this combination of reservoirs and refrigerant, or working fluid is what we call it in the heat engine sense.
Okay, where is the control for then that fluid flow, the phase change throughout the system?
Right, so the phase, so as I said earlier, the system itself kind of has a high and low pressure side. So when I'm running a heat pump, I have a gas compressor that takes the vapor CO2 and increases its temperature and pressure at the same time. Much like if you pump up a bike pump and you accidentally grab that, yeah, you've all done it, grab down at the bottom, you burn yourself. It's the same basic process. So you increase the temperature and pressure of the fluid. And then we have heat exchangers, which are some of the boxes in that turbine hall there that transfer that heat from the CO2 into the heat transfer fluid before it goes and puts it into the concrete. So it's that process of the heat transfer that accomplishes that reduction in temperature and in density, fluid density at the same time. And we do the same process on the low pressure side. So now once I've cooled it off, I expand that fluid again through essentially a pump running backwards. And now it's at lower pressure and lower temperature. It's now at subcritical conditions. And in fact, it's a liquid. And so now I boil that liquid off. And that process of boiling it requires heat. It draws that heat out of the water, and that's what makes the
And
ice.
then you re-vaporize and start again.
And you close the loop. Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Wow, thank you very much.
And the control of that, to your point, is his baby over the last 15 years. So.
Okay, I want to take it, let's take it apart like Lego. I think that's wonderful. Thank you. That was a great explanation.
Thanks.
Dr. Davies, I see you taking yourself off mute.
Yeah, just quick. So I'm looking at this picture and I see this big giant tank full of ice, and I'm wondering, do you have problems with expansion and dealing with the phase change, ice changing volume? And then the other question is, once you get there, how are you then thawing it back out so that it can be used again? And then that's what question number one. And question number two is, how does the environmental temperature of this plant affect its operation? Operated in the Southwest versus in Alaska, for example, where you have external temperatures that are pretty cold. Does it affect the operation of the plant?
Yeah, those are great questions. So what's drawn there is what looks like a solid block of ice is not actually a solid block of ice. Inside that tank are a series of coils of tubing, essentially. And so the ice, the CO2 flows inside of the tubes and the ice forms on the outside of the tubes. We don't go to 100% ice like this sort of shows. It's really about 70% ice. So even at the fully charged condition, there's still gaps between the ice layer on one tube and the adjacent tube. So that's what allows us to not break stuff, is what it comes down to. And in fact, we can use that density change of the ice to detect how much ice we have, because the water level will actually rise as we increase the amount of ice that's in the tank. The second question was, how does ambient or the environmental temperature affect the operation of the system? Because it's largely a closed loop system, it's relatively independent of the outside air temperature. Not completely though. Kind of one of the second level effects of a system like this is that for it to stay in balance, in other words, we're taking heat out of one reservoir and we're putting it into another, and then we're transferring back the other direction. We have to maintain the balance between the heat in and heat out. And if you're a thermodynamics person, the one thing you learn very quickly is that anything that's not perfect results in extra heat. And so there's always a little bit of heat that has to be essentially disposed of. And so that is actually rejected to the world through some air coolers that are kind of on the upper left corner there, right next to the substation.
Yeah.
So those discharge heat out into the air, they actually work better as the outside air temperature is lower. And so this system will be slightly more effective and slightly more efficient in a cold climate than it is in like South Texas. But it's a relatively small effect. Unlike most power plants that you think of have a pretty strong impact of ambient air temperature. I used to work for GE aircraft engines and help design and build stationary power plant gas turbines. And yeah, in the winter time, they performed magnificently. And in the summertime, when you really needed the electricity, they kind of limped along. So this is modestly affected by that, but very little.
Thank you.
Now, that's a good point. One of the interesting things about up here is the fact that what would be waste heat in other places are very, very valuable BTUs. So is that another capture opportunity for other uses?
There's a really interesting capture opportunity in this climate. One of the things that, as I said, you always have more heat than you know what to do with, and you can transfer back in. So one of the things that we've been toying around with, but we haven't been able to take the time to really quantify, is the opportunity to actually accumulate more, we'll call it cold charge in the cold reservoir to balance the extra heat. Because if it's sub-freezing outside, that's essentially free cold. And it's a backwards way of thinking about things, but it could actually be a pretty significant impact on the performance of the system. It's just a little hard to figure out exactly how we do that yet. So until we figure out exactly how we do that, we're not going to bookkeep it, but
Okay.
we're working on it.
I was actually thinking a little more 101.
So you're saying, can I capture the heat off the air cool condensers?
And use it for distributed heating or some other purpose.
Yeah, if you want that, you can
Yes.
definitely have that.
Definitely could.
That is truly free heat.
Yep.
It's relatively low temperature, but it's, for here, it's probably
You
usable.
probably boosted it. Yeah, that's right.
And every little bit helps.
Yeah.
And we have lots of places that just need a little bit of extra heat. I think of the Trans-Alaska pipeline specifically, where because of throughput, frankly, we're always at risk of that thing turning into a giant tube of chapstick.
And a lot of projects have historically toyed with the idea of doing sort of a greenhouse situation with just excess heat.
Right.
I know there was a coal plant, I think out in North Pole, they were toying with the idea of putting a tomato garden next to it, just
Sure.
the heat for that.
Right.
You always have the heat rejection from the, steam turbines. Yeah.
Well, we're not trying to monopolize the discussion. However,
Yeah.
again, you're driving the slides. I'm driving.
Go back a couple to the summary. I apologize for jumping out of order. I thought that made sense to go back. One more. So I mentioned where some of this technology started. Echogen in the last 15 years, a pioneer in the SCO2 cycle. And Tim touched on some of these already, but in terms of the drivers for the design, low cost first and foremost. When you look at the opportunities with the Department of Energy right now, they've got a target goal for long duration energy storage, which says they want to get the levelized cost of storage down less than 5 cents a kilowatt hour over time in the future. So cost is you have to be able to do it more effectively than lithium ion batteries from a cost standpoint, and your efficiency is inherently going to be a bit lower. We wanted to use stuff that was not exotic, that we understood worked. We understood that it was not a science experiment, and the experiments happened, but they were done some time ago. Something that's scalable, can be put anywhere. We talked about climate, something that we kind of think it's almost like a pumped hydro you can put anywhere in terms of how it works and the kind of energy you're going to get out of it. Smaller pumped hydro facility. And something that, a couple of the other important points, we talked about the simplicity of the materials. And this thing is designed for very long life, right? And it's inherently safe, and it's quite recyclable. And that's the Westinghouse design philosophy on making sure that something lasts. Our history is designing nuclear power plants that are going to run completely error-free for 60 years or more. So that this thing is designed to go 50 years. It probably can go longer.
I was thinking washing machines that go
There
for
you go.
50 years.
Right.
When I was a kid.
You're going to do standard maintenance on it. We get the question sometimes, what if the concrete cracks? The interesting thing there is, number one, you're going to get any cracking out of it. The concrete's designed to not break down. And you're going to get whatever crack you're gonna get in the first handful of cycles, thermal cycles. But the reality is if you do crack it a bit, as long as you're not turning it to powder, it actually helps your heat transfer. You get more surface area. It actually can improve your performance. So it actually self-improves with that. So there's no concern about the concrete cracking. But yeah, it's really a long life asset. It's pretty power dense. You compare this to that rendering we were looking at is 1,000 megawatt hours, so 100 megawatts for 10 hours. It's about a quarter to a sixth of the size of the batteries would be about 6 times as much real estate to get the same amount of storage. So it's pretty compact. Efficiency, you're going to be in the 50 to 60% range. Again, lithium ion is quite a bit better, but when you look at the levelized cost over time, it's really driven by CapEx in general. And the DOE's published some very specific ways to calculate those things. And it's part of what we're working on with them now, showing the path to 5 cents per kilowatt hour levelized cost of storage. But it's when you look at that over time, our target was to be at least 30% better than batteries for a 10-hour application. If you go to 12, you go to 20 hours, that gets better and better because I'm adding more water, oil, and concrete, which is not the expensive part of the system. So the economics continue to get better the longer in duration you go. But at that 10-hour point, which is going to be the near-term need, we want to be able to be cheaper than batteries by that. And battery pricing varies so much right now. In some cases, you'll be a quarter of the cost. Some cases, you'll be half of it. So it varies on a case-by-case basis. If you maybe we'll jump down to the slide on Alaska.
Well, again, regarding the environmental impact, it takes quite a bit of effort to make lithium, to get that lithium and the other components for the battery.
And you've got to do something with it at the end, right?
The waste products.
So I'll give you an example. In Bulgaria, we've been working with, we supply, so Westinghouse is the only company in the world outside of Russia that figured out how to make Russian nuclear fuel. So we've been supplying Russian to fuel our design that works in their reactors to Bulgaria, to the Ukraine, and other countries for some time. The demand is quite high, as you can imagine. At the moment, nobody wants to get fuel from Russia, so now they're all coming to us, that's an interesting dynamic unto itself. We have a good relationship with the Bulgarians, and we signed a agreement with them last year to put 2 gigawatt hours of storage in with them. And one of the things that drove that was they were developing their energy roadmap, and they committed, I think they needed 4 gigawatt hours of storage to match up with the renewables that they were planning for the next 10 years. And then there was some pushback. And after they already made the commitment, publicly and otherwise, and the people in the country, we're not doing that all with batteries. We're not going to dispose of them. For a lot of reasons, we don't want to do that much with batteries. So they have there's a European Union Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is some funding. So they're using some of that towards this to go, and this is the option they're going to do about half of that at least. For the reasons that you mentioned, right? It's both the sourcing of the lithium ion, it's also the supply chain risk, and then it's the disposal of them. In that case, the disposal concerns really drove a lot of it. And again, this isn't meant, in a lot of ways, it's really not meant to directly compete with lithium ion. We're not trying to compete at 2 or 4 hours, but that's why we set up front. You got to have different solutions. You can't put all this big storage out there with only batteries.
So again, you did note, 6 acres.
Yeah.
So
About 6
relatively,
acres for a gigawatt hour. That's correct.
so really relatively compact footprint, which is also one of the benefits we were looking at as we were discussing the Westinghouse nuclear technologies.
Yeah.
Again, high energy density, relatively compact footprint.
Right.
Okay. I would open it up. Hey, do we have any questions? I can't believe we don't. There he is. Hey, Doug, please.
Hey, how are you? I've been listening and driving at the same time, and now I'm parked. Very interesting discussion. When does this become economic for a community like Fairbanks to say replace BESS or supplement BESS with this technology? What's the cost of construction? I might have missed on that.
From a cost standpoint, so at that 100 megawatt size, roughly $300. So early deployments now in the next couple of years, roughly $300 a kilowatt hour. Over time, getting down to about $220 is the target. And we may be able to beat that, but about $300 for the first articles. So it's pretty good compared to current lithium ion pricing. It's probably near half on a per kilowatt hour basis than you're going to see in most places. Maybe even better for Up in Alaska, yeah.
It's much better.
So it's the CapEx is quite a bit better.
One of the things you have to do with lithium ion up here is you have to put it in a
Put it in a
building,
building and heat it.
insulate it, heat it,
Yeah,
massive fire systems.
right,
So it becomes very expensive.
right.
This might be a later slide answer, but how many operators do you usually need to man this?
So it can be remotely operated. You don't really need an operator. You're probably gonna, we've planned out our cost estimations include operators for levelized cost of storage. The nice thing is, if you're an existing utility, for example, I can easily train my technicians, my engineers on this. And in some cases, so in the case of Healy, for example, if I'm going to close Healy 2, save some jobs, right? And it's a pretty transferable skill set in terms of what this equipment looks like. The biggest difference to a power plant is the SCO2 turbine, 100 megawatt turbine would fit in this desk, right? Tim, it's very power dense, very small compared to a steam or a gas unit. Which means less people have actually taken apart and maintained it, right? And those type of things.
I have a 10 megawatt turbine sitting on my bookshelf. And it's not a very sturdy bookshelf, so.
Julio.
Tom DeLong, if you don't mind, Doc Davies, I'm gonna go ahead and let Tom go. He hadn't had a question yet.
Hi, guys. Thanks for being here, and been following this for a little bit. I really love this idea of not digging up the earth to have a long duration storage. You haven't mentioned the DOE, what they call the Department of Energy's long shot competition. I do believe Westinghouse and Echogen are proposing to submit to the DOE the long shot, long duration energy storage. And I think DOE defines that as greater than 10 hours. Maybe you'll hit on that. I think that's the situation. What I'm really interested in is this type of technology with a round trip efficiency of around 60%. What situations do you see on a rail belt level or a GVA level where we really have excess power to charge this battery? I mean, I know a fair bit about the dispatch of GVA's electricity. When Healy 2 and Healy 1 are running, we use every bit of it. The rest of the stuff, maybe some Bradley, we take what we can. We can't really have excess at Bradley very often. And we just as soon keep that water behind the dam where it's already in the form of a storage device. So I really don't see, let me rephrase that. Big wind is the one situation, and the rail belt utilities are talking about that. Big wind is the one situation where I see at times the rail belt utilities would have excess generation. Other than that, it's all natural gas fired, and there is no real situation where the marginal economics, I don't think, pan out. So I'm curious to see if you see big wind as essential to charge this battery, and thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'll give 2 comments to that, and then Chris, if you want to add on, that's up to you. So big wind is definitely a piece of it, right? And this would enable a more significant expansion, to believe, of wind power along the rail belt in a useful manner. The secondary comment, outside of taking excess generation, which there isn't a ton of, and this applies to a lot of places right now. New York State's a very good example. The big value here, there's 2 other pieces of it. One is transmission avoidance, transmission resiliency, avoiding transmission issues where you have single points of failure. And the other is overall ancillary services. So this is a rotating mass on the grid, which can provide stability, can provide reactive power support, can provide those other services combined with shoring up the various transmission challenges, but you have to be able to charge it. You're correct. And I think wind is a big part of that. If you look, I think there's some other opportunities to shave off some power. But we're actually investigating that right now with Golden Valley in terms of what that looks like in the best case. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add anything or not. No, okay. Decent enough answer.
But one of the big costs for, say, LNG storage is just the fact that you have to cool down the tank to begin with. And so you end up using quite a bit of resource just to cool down the tank. For a system like this, when we say charge it up, what kind of load are we talking about?
to charge at 100 megawatt size, you're talking near 150 megawatt, above 140. Depending on how you size the charging cycle, you can vary that. Call it 140 megawatts or less, like up to that. Yeah, and you can size the charging and the discharge duration is easy to size with the reservoirs, but you can also size the charging cycle to meet your needs. It's a faster charge, a slower charge, less power. That's something you size the compressors for.
Doc Davies.
Yeah, just a question about whether you, what's the largest version of this plant that you've built so far?
Yeah, so where we are right now, it's not in this slide deck, it was in the other one. Where this technology is, it's been, we're at a commercial deployment standpoint.
Do you want me to jump?
No, it's okay, I can talk to it, that'll be fine. So there is of this storage cycle and some of the things Tim was talking about, there is a system running at Echogen's facility in Ohio that was mostly funded by the DOE ARPA-E program. The equipment here, the cycles, for example, the SCO2 cycles, they've been deployed at larger scale in the 10 megawatt range for oil and gas applications. The other pieces have been tested, but integrated at this scale, it hasn't been done. Our first agreement was the one I mentioned in Bulgaria, and we're going right now. After we mentioned, I think the question we didn't answer previously, the DOE, we're looking at applications for it's actually the Energy Storage Grand Challenge, which they announced a couple of years ago. The long shot or the big shot, I forget what they call it, that you
They
mentioned.
got earth shot.
They got a lot of
salt
shots.
But yeah, everything's gotta have that word.
That has to do with what I mentioned earlier on the 5 cent per kilowatt hour target. So we are, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations in the US that was formed last year is meant specifically for this type of application, taking technologies that are at advanced enough technical level and deploying them at large scale. And that's how the programs are built in a phased approach to de-risk the projects, not get too far ahead of yourself, right? There's really good milestones and breakdowns and how the project goes. So I think we'll be successful. I think with the DOE, and there's some other opportunities coming as well. But honestly, when you look at the extra time it takes to open the Department of Energy, we'll probably have a couple of these. There's a couple other ones I won't mention by name. The Bulgaria one was announced publicly, but there's a developer in Asia that we're working with where they're looking at multiple units in 2 countries. That's pretty close. And there's some other of our customers in Europe. So chances are, what happens with the DOE, it could be Article 3 or 4 of this scale.
You just mentioned, sorry,
Yeah.
you just mentioned 5 cent kilowatt hour power.
That's levelized cost of
target.
storage, not levelized cost of energy. So it's different than thinking of the cost from a generation perspective. That's correct.
Okay.
That's right. Right now, first article, we're around 7-8 cents, get down to 5 cents within a few years.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's storage costs are calculated a little funny and there's kind of evolving. I think they change how you calculate those things pretty frequently. So
As Mr. DeLong noted, again, currently we have coal, right? We have a lot of coal and we're allowed to use it still. He talked about natural gas, but you mentioned the fact that we're working to do a shoestring to the natural gas power as well as the hydro. Short answer is that part of the energy strategy, it seems, for the state of Alaska, kind of the longer term goal is transitioning off of these fossil fuels,
right.
To things that have less negative effluence. So like with more windmills and more solar panels, this becomes more and more necessary,
Right.
As something to store and regularize the system, store power and regularize the system.
Right. And I believe around the state, there's been investigations of different potential additional battery systems, right, of meaningful capacity. So this could be something that displaces that need. And again, you can put this, you can put it anywhere. So but yeah, that each use case is different, right? I mean, there's applications with wind. There's the East Coast is looking at replacing gas peaking capacity with exactly this type of facility. There's energy shifting in Texas, right? There's having this stored up and ready to go in emergencies in certain states, or extremely expensive oil fire generation at when the 3 times a year that the load gets high in Massachusetts and Boston's in a real crunch. They spend an inordinate amount of money. There's a lot of different use cases and they're all different. It doesn't make sense everywhere, but it's as you said, as you try to decarbonize and as your electricity demand changes, it's something that if you plug it in the right spot, it can help you in more ways than just taking extra energy and dispatching it back onto the grid.
It's important and interesting how important storage is. I mean, we're looking for storage to take summer crops and keep them longer for food security and et cetera. So it's kind of a universal problem. But you mentioned big wind. What would one consider to be big wind?
That's, I think it's kind of subjective. To me, it's like, it's 80 megawatts or bigger, I've always considered big wind. Right?
Then where do you categorize, say, 30 to 40 megawatts?
Medium wind.
Okay, there's not a more sophisticated name for that. Okay, thank you.
What is the generation capacity of Beaver Creek?
26.
26.
Yeah.
Tiny one.
Delta's that. Up to
But also with Delta.
Delta, yeah, adding Delta in.
All right, should we proceed?
Beaver Creek is 24.
24. 24.5.
Yeah, I would say in terms of, we covered probably, there's my voice again, most of what I think I wanted to cover, we could, the other slide, if you wanted to pull the other one up. Just a couple of the questions, I'll show a timeline.
While we have this moment, again, I would just remind everyone that this is for your benefit. So if you have any questions, please do fire away. I think I did see one in the chat. Mr. Newman.
Yes, lithium ion batteries. And Tim, you can respond. So the response time, this is more like a gas power plant. So you're looking at about 10% per minute. So to ramp up to 100 megawatts in that example, you'd have about 10 minutes. This is not meant to provide that rapid dynamic, very, very fast frequency response that batteries do. This is not that solution. Now, if you could combine it, you can either have an existing battery system or you can put 20 minutes of battery on this system. I know eVinci, the microreactors, talked about the same thing, right? Putting 20, 30 minutes of lithium ion batteries with that for the same reason. So you could augment the capabilities in that regard, but this system by itself is not meant for that need. Do you have anything else, Tim?
No, I mean, it's more of the benefits are from a frequency stabilization perspective, more in terms of providing inertia as opposed to providing compensation. Batteries are really good at ultra fast frequency compensation. But part of the reason you need that is because you already have too much non-synchronous generation on the grid. So,
But to also address the regulation point, it works fine for regulating wind power.
Oh, yes, yeah, for being correct.
Because it's actually faster than LN or faster than Brain 7.
Right.
So
That's just what we currently use now to regulate.
Okay. If you can go through, I'll just pull up a couple extra points while we got a few minutes, see if there's any additional questions.
Can everyone see the screen share?
We talked through most of this. You can keep going.
Oh, back or down?
Down, yeah. Keep going.
Sir. Oh, and this just simplified.
It simplifies the view, yeah. I didn't give you the simple, we get right into the more complicated look. You can keep going, and you can have these. So this, in terms of where we are, this is a timeline on the commercialization. So there's some images in the bottom right of the system of the storage system running at Echogen's facility. I mentioned the deployment in oil and for oil and gas. That's that EPS 100 skid you see there in the green skid. There's been a lot of money in patents prior to 19. Echogen alone spent over $90 million, has probably 100 patents at this point.
globally,
On the technology, and all the R&D and the hard work was done, prior to then. Then we started to integrate the system, do testing, build the test facility. You see on there, I mentioned the Bulgaria BEH, the state-owned utility of Bulgaria. We had that announcement last year. And that's where we are on the path to right now for the first commercial units. So I just want to give that timeline, a couple images there.
So back to the lithium ion battery versus nuclear versus this.
Sure.
If there's one thing we've learned over our 15 years of discussions here at this table, is that there is no silver bullet. You know, what it will be is it'll be a number of things that complement each other that it will end up getting us where we want to go. At least it seems that. That's right. Till fusion comes along.
Well, we got some folks working on that as well.
But even then, we're still not at the point where we're flying airplanes on electricity. Sort of that way. All right.
And you can, see, I think there's one more thing there's, keep going. No, yeah, you're going the right way. Keep going. See, on the next one.
Okay.
We already saw this stuff again. This is a separate presentation, but there might be an image of the SCO2. I don't have it in this one. I didn't know what Marianne sent you, but that's okay. I think we're almost out of time.
When you say SCO2, supercritical CO2.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, yes, we are nearing the top of the hour, but we do have several minutes left. If I'm not sure what you all schedule looks
No,
like.
we're fine.
Okay, well then I would open it up. So, all right, everybody. I do have the slides still pulled up though, so know that I can jump back to them if anyone has a specific slide they'd like to reference. Do we have any questions or comments from the group? This is the quietest I've seen them. Pam Throop. It's lovely to see you. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Pam. One of the images of you is off mute, one's on. I just didn't know if you had a question. Okay.
No, I don't. Thank you.
Nice to see you, man.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, again, I would offer up for final bites at the apple. Yes.
I wanted to wait because I always have too many questions, but if we were to take all of the bits and pieces, for lack of a better term, of things we might want to put together to meet our energy needs, we're meeting solar, wind, maybe some nuclear, whatever, can it all be stored depending on how much of this capacity we put in?
Yeah, so that's a good point. This is one application is you could pair it with a big wind installation, big wind. But this is source agnostic. Right, so a lot of the applications are going to park this somewhere. I'm going to pull power from coal, from nuclear, from wherever I'm getting it from, and then dispatch it wherever I need it. And that's part of, in Alaska, it doesn't need to displace that. I'm going to have fossil power generation. Sometimes I might want to optimize. This might allow me to balance things out where I can optimize how I'm utilizing my assets from an O&M standpoint and other things. So to provide some advantages there, you can take the power from anywhere.
So from a safety and security point of view, what are your thoughts on how do you secure a facility like this?
Well, it would be secured much as any power plant would be, right? I don't think we bring, so Westinghouse happens to have the world leading organization in physical security, right? And we have to do that for nuclear power plants. We actually have a group, that's their job, and you should see their training facility we have. It's live ammunition and buildings and everything else. It's a fun job. I don't know how you get it, but it's pretty fun. But
I'll show you the container building.
but depending on the location, the requirements, we would design the physical security system and the cybersecurity system to meet the needs of any application. And we have that. Yeah, that's right in our wheelhouse.
It's good because the inputting sources are not involved in terms that they're distributed wherever, but then you've got this place here. So glad you're working on that.
Yeah, and there's been talk right now about some out east, some of the states want to see if they can qualify this as a transmission asset rather than generation asset, which brings a whole different economic model in. That they can use, they can, and there's, you're familiar, right? It's a whole different, it's a regulatory, but it's also the monetization of the asset and what that looks like. Because the challenge we have today is the market doesn't recognize these things for what they are, right? So it's difficult for a utility in Connecticut to build one of these and use the existing wholesale electricity prices and make it make financial sense. That's where the government's coming in and saying, we need policy in the future. We don't have it. Like the plan is for this to become an asset class of its own. Some states are already there. Some of New York's going there very quickly, but right now, the market mechanisms are a little bit funny, and that's where these incentives and other things help out. But qualifying it as a transmission asset is a whole different equation, and there's some folks actively looking at how they can do that because this can provide. It's a non-wire alternative, right? I can avoid expanding my transmission lines if I have a community that has a growing population. and has increasing electricity demands, and now I need to add more transmission capacity. That can be very, very long lead and very expensive. The alternative is that's not going to be a flat demand in that community. So I can put an asset like this in that community and then charge it when the demand's low and have it there. And then when those peaks come, I have the power locally. I don't need to run additional transmission lines. So it's an increasingly important use case for these types of technologies.
Okay.
It's going to be very interesting to see where the markets go the next 5-10 years. There's going to be a lot of evolution.
Well, we're having those discussions here in state as well.
Right.
We're finally having a discussion between our utilities.
Yeah, equalization of electricity costs around the state.
Well, just to try to de-balkanize the system, it made complete sense. I mean, it makes absolute sense why we had so many different utilities for such a small population. It's the vast distances and the need to be able to provide reliable, secure, no fail service to your customers.
Right.
But as we've grown, we're starting to work only now, though. It's only been the last couple of years we've been working in real earnest to better integrate the system. And transmission has always been a challenge.
Right.
One of the things that certainly our natural gas utility, in an ideal world, there would be a pipe that would connect the large LNG storage tank here in Fairbanks to the storage facility out in North Pole, and you'd be able to push gas. But there's not an easy way to recoup the cost of that. What is in fact, a rational, reasonable, investment in security of supply. So, okay. Well, everybody, man, this has been neat. So, hey, Westinghouse, you guys can come anytime.
Thanks.
Yeah, we love your presentation. Well, again, I would open it up one last time. We are here at the top of the hour, but the gentlemen do have one more moment or two. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any hands. All right, everybody. Well, again, friends of Westinghouse, thank you so much for coming. This is really neat stuff. We'll be watching as those discussions progress regarding, how this technology might be integrated, right, here in our community for our benefit. As to next week, just know, back to the air quality discussion, I've done a reach out to see if we can get a presentation on heat pumps. Because it has been coming up as a possible additional solution. Yeah, home scale, home scale heat pumps. Because it's been offered up as a possible, again, additional technology we might use to help, frankly, help with our PM 2.5 issue, in our electric costs. But again, I haven't quite nailed that down, but I will be letting you know. So go ahead and look for next week. I will send out the notice, though, whether we're having a meeting or not. All right. Well, everyone, again, thank you so much for coming. Have a great rest of your day, a great weekend, and we'll see you soon for Energy for All Alaska Task Force.
Thank you.